Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name is Glenn Keller and I'll be your instructor today in this video. In the previous videos in the course, we have talked about installing prerequisites for Teamcenter, the operating system that we're running on, things to consider, the database install, help server, license server, whatnot. So in this video, what we're going to do is take a look at Deployment Center now that we have installed as of the last video. And we're going to log in, we're going to create a Teamcenter environment, and all in one, it's going to have all the basic bells and whistles. We're even adding in a feature called change management, just to kind of have an additional server extension in there and just get it all set up and ready to go. And then we'll execute the deployment. And then in the next video, we'll pick up where the deployment left off and we'll test out the system and get it all set up. So in here, Deployment Center, we supplied this username and password in the install config.properties file. So it's dc-admin in our case, dc-admin. And then in here, we get the interface of Deployment Center. So like we said in the last video, the getting started is really just a place that gives you links to helpful videos and content on the Siemens site. Definitely check that out. The Siemens documentation is great. In the environments are where we're going to create the Teamcenter environment. So in our case, we're going to create a Teamcenter training environment to build that up. And then the software repositories are where our media is. So we now know that the additional software directory that we pointed ours to is working. So if it wasn't working, we wouldn't get the media in there. And if I jump into that software location, you can see that both pieces of software are listed right here. So there's the extracted folder and there's the zip. And then pay attention, it is yelling that the zip is not compatible. So I could come in here and delete this from here, but just note that will delete your zip from this directory. So if you don't want to delete it from this directory and you want a backup of that media, definitely copy it out of here before you do that. So if I come in here, I don't want that media, I'm just going to hit the minus button up at the top and hit remove, hit OK, and it will remove that from there and show me only what's there. And when I come back to the folder, it will have deleted it. So definitely pay attention to that as you're removing things, but I've got my media lined up now and I'm good to go. If I go to obsolete media across the top, this is stuff that I've marked as obsolete. It's no longer needed. That's in that software directory. I may have a ton. And then the overview of that server and how much space is left and kind of where it is. If I go back out of the software repositories and go to machines, this is the current machine that Deployment Center is put on, as well as some specs about the machine. If I come over here and click it, it'll kind of give me a nice little impression. To build Teamcenter up though, I'm going to full screen this and we're going to go into environments. And we're going to just create a new environment. Up across the top, you could delete environments, but be careful with that. Definitely take a look at our snapshots or backing up an environment videos. We could also export the environment to a quick deploy file. And we can duplicate or copy the environment as well. But let's go ahead and create one first. So I'm going to say add to add a environment. And then I need to select software first. That way it knows what I can install. So in my case, it would be 2412. You may have an 002 patch or a BMIDE template in here as well. I'm going to choose update selected software, and then it's going to move to options. And options are going to give me the ability to pick whether or not my environment is distributed or in a single box, whether I'm running J2EE based deployments, which is like Wildfly, JBoss, Tomcat, or if I'm running something like IIS. And based on that, I'll get different options during the installation. What it's doing at the moment to take so long to move forward is it's reading that install and adding it to my environment, which it has now created on the left-hand side. Now, it has the media correct, and I could move to the next option, but I'm just going to go ahead and rename my environment and set up some specifics for it. I'm going to pick Overview up across the top here. And then in the Overview tab, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Edit button on the top right. So I'm choosing edit, and that'll put it into edit mode. Just note the name has to be no spaces. So I'm going to call this Teamcenter Training. I can choose development or integration production. Just note that this does dictate whether or not you need a key to do migration. So if you have production set versus development, this is a training site, so I'm going to choose that. The configuration ID, I'm going to call this Teamcenter Training, just so that this comes out to represent the environment that I want in the files that are generated. The site ID is here. The location is on Training 01, which is the name of my server. And then comments is Teamcenter and Active Workspace environment for training purposes. Then I can see that the software I've selected and then the default applications that are going to get built with this are here. So it is adding Active Workspace by default, the ability to control people in the Active Workspace build, subscriptions, reportings. This one is the base Teamcenter Foundation, document management, GraphQL, and other components that make up that Active Workspace hosting platform called the Gateway. Available components that are being installed with this are things like the corporate server, which is our core component of Teamcenter, database server components. So think of these as kind of the pages in the Teamcenter Environment Manager if you were working with those before. Now I'm going to go back in and choose Save in the top right corner. And now I've got my environment saved. I'm going to go back to Deploy Software. And then I'll be able to go to Options. So you can click it down at the bottom or you can click it at the top. It doesn't matter. It will move to the next page. In our case, I have Wildfly deployed. So I want it to build me a file associated to Wildfly, which is a WAR file. If you need a zip file for IIS, you can choose .NET. Environment type, single box in my case. Distributed will allow you to have multiple packages generated, so you can take each package over to the machine necessary to build it up. In single box, it's going to assume everything's in one. Local or global, so based on this, the infrastructure type, it's going to set up defaults and information related to that type of a deployment. And then high availability for something like a production environment. In our case, I'm going to choose Save Environment Options, as this is just a training environment and that should work for us. Okay, so it is giving me several applications by default here, and I can install just these applications, but there are several features that I know I can take advantage of without an additional license that I'm going to add into this. In addition to that, I want to add a couple of things like a rich client or a BMIDE to work with the administration data. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Edit here. And this is probably the most significant difference between the TEM and working in Deployment Center is all of those features that we used to have to line up between client and server are no longer lined up between client and server. You basically pick something like 3D visualization, and now you get all the prereqs. You see active content auto selected, active workspace base selected. You also get the client and server component for it. So this is a huge win for Deployment Center. I'm also going to add Access Manager, which is an administrative component to Active Workspace so that I can work with that. I'm going to add the Active Workspace Assistant, which is a component that allows me to see my clipboard and see commonly used commands and things like that. If I come down further, I have Active Workspace Visualization 2D Viewer. I don't have a license. I only have a license for Foundation and Change Management. So in here, I'm not going to pick anything from Advanced PLM Systems, Aerospace and Defense. These are all custom templates. I am going to do Assembly BOM. I am going to do Audit to give me audit log information in the client and additional style sheets. I'm going to come down and Collapse BOM Management, Briefcase Browser, There's only a few others in here that I want to make sure that I pick up on. There's integration pieces, and each customer is going to be very, very different with this. So I'm going to come down, document management's here. That came in by default. And then there's easy plan. And I have change management installed because my license or selected. If I come down a little bit further, I could install dispatcher components, which I may do. Extensions are here. So there's user management, which is going to be your people location for organization. I could choose dispatcher as well. So I'll say dispatcher. And then if I come down further, dispatcher is for, let's say if you want to generate a report and have it do it in the background, it runs the async service. It can convert one file to another. You can use it to save CAD data and then generate a JT file. So that dispatcher component's extremely important. If I come down further, there's several mixed in here, and it's not the standard order that we're used to. So other ones are like integration for NX Foundation if you're using NX. Still making my way down for some just essentials that I make sure that I have in the build. In here, I don't need manufacturing process management. I do want markup. It gives me the ability to redline assemblies. If I come down a little bit further, you can see that these are my sample files for customization. If you're not doing SOA customization or ITK, you don't need the sample files, but I'm going to pick it. PLM XML export and import. That's going to allow me to move data in and out of the system. And then if I keep going down, I have reactive logging, which is going to give me an ability to capture syslogs from different processes. Reporting is already selected, and I want that to be able to create reports, have a report dashboard. And then I'll come down even further, and I've got different elements I could add in. Subscription is selected, so I'll keep that. Subscribe to different actions in the system. Keep going down. There's different capabilities like AI chat you could add in, but you do need your own cloud server for that. And then if I come down, there's NX. Just looking through, there's a lot of different things you could install. Visualization extension down below, and then workflows. So that's kind of what I'm installing in here. That'll give me the whole shebang. Now on the next page is where I'm going to add my rich client, my BMIDE, and those types of elements. Now this represents a base. If you don't select change management, it's basically just the foundation license, and it gives you a lot of the components that you may need. I'm going to choose update selected applications at this point, and it's going to go through and load those up into the components view. All right, so now it says pending installation. You can validate, scroll up and down, but notice there's a couple of these like microservice framework that are in here that we did not pick. Now that was pre-picked. It's a support system for the Active Workspace client. I'm going to go ahead and click Go to Components at this point. And in Components, the one thing that I do want to make sure I do is Deployment Center has the ability to add things, standalone applications, let's call it, that install into their own TC root typically, or they could be installed into this one. Teamcenter rich clients, FSC server caches, BMIDEs, all of those things represent those additional elements. Now you can remove elements now inside of Deployment Center up here at the top, but you can also add them. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add before I begin on this page, and just select those additional components. So I'm going to have Active Workspace installed, which is going to test my 4-tier connections. But I also want a 2-tier BMIDE and rich client sitting on my server to allow me to log in even if the 4-tier server is down. In this case, you could choose a BMIDE 4-tier or 2-tier and add an additional connection to that BMIDE. So I'm just going to pick 2-tier. Now here's your 4-tier if you wanted it, or your standalone. 4-tier just sets it up with a 4-tier connection, which goes through your web server. 2-tier is a direct connect to the database. The Business Modeler ID standalone doesn't have a connection. You do need a connection for certain aspects of the BMIDE tool. Then you've got things like database daemons, LDAP servers, all these advanced configurations, load balancers. But in our case, what we want is the 2-tier rich client, which is right here. And that's going to give me some additional administrative tools like advanced search building and PLM/XML import-export administration, report building, those types of things. If I scroll through, I'm also going to do the Teamcenter Management Console, which is the interface for the server manager that will allow me to refresh sessions and find information about those sessions. And then you have your security services, your single sign-on, your session agent for client deploys, and security services TCSS, which is going to be your login service, as well as your identity service. I'm not going to pick these in this one, but take a look at future videos where we set that up. And then in here, I'm just going to go ahead and say update selected components. Now, don't freak out with this volume entry. This is an additional volume. It will build you a volume by default. So I'm going to choose update selected components. And then it should update the left-hand side for me and integrate those with what's already there. Takes a couple of minutes to take those components and slide them into the deck the correct way. The one thing I do want to emphasize is making sure that you do this in the order that I recorded it. The reason is because you want to make sure you have everything in this list before you begin to edit the top to the bottom, because anything that you fill out in here actually gets propagated to everything else, and that way you don't have to fill out every page. So the days of repeating the same information over and over again, except for passwords, is gone. So you can put tcroot up in here, and anywhere that calls tcroot is going to be available. So at this point, if I scroll through, I can see the BMID 2-tier is here, dispatcher is here, I can see the rich client is here, the management console is here, so they got added in. Also notice the icons on the right hand side of this. So some of them are good, which this one is the license server, so it's saying, hey, the license server can be communicated to. FSCs, and the corporate server, database server. The other ones are waiting to be installed. And then what I want to do here is simply just start at the top and make my way down. So I'm going to start with Active Workspace Client Builder. You can see there's a start button here you can click. And on the right hand side, it's going to pop it up. You can go into full screen mode if you'd like. Now in here, I always click the eyeball first. Now, if you're new to the installing process, then the eyeball just gives you extra information that's not absolutely necessary. But I'm going to go ahead and fill this out and then click the eyeball to show you what's left. In this case, the client is the Active Workspace interface. I'm deploying all of this on the same machine. So that's going to be my training 01 machine. Make sure you spell it right. And this is all going to be here. But if this component was deployed to a different machine, I would need to put the server name I'm deploying it to in there. The server name, the server type is going to be Windows versus Linux. I'm going to do Windows. And then down here, this is the installation directory, tcroot. So in the system, you get a bunch of tcroots. It's wherever anything's installed, and you get one tcdata, which represents your database. In here, once I update this, all the other values will pick up on that value. If you need to change it after the fact, I have run into issues where certain values do not pick up that change. So if you set it right the first time, everything will pick it up. If you need to change it, you need to go through every entry and make sure it's not updated. The logs still seem to output to a different location if you do run into that scenario. So my case, one thing I do want to point out is 2412 still has 2312 in the default path here. So don't fall for that. Definitely update that to 2412. And then I like to change Teamcenter root to tcroot. I'm dealing with Windows and they have path length restrictions. So TC root's kind of a common terminology in this system. And then I want to put it into the apps directory, not program files. So C apps Siemens. And then if you want to, I mean, there's no harm in coming up to the apps Siemens folder and then seeing that Teamcenter 12 would go here, TC root would go in there. Now, one key is you cannot have that folder pre-created. So make sure that it's not there yet. It will build it for you. Publishing the client assets just means once it's done building the client, it will automatically publish that out to be hosted for you to the gateway. I'm going to go ahead and click the eyeball. And then down here, I could pick my language packs. And then if I wanted overridden connections, like different ports, different host names, beyond what it's going to set, I could override them. Hit save. And you'll notice everything says start for the most part, except for corporate server and FSC groups. So now when I put that in, everything will have a status on it for the most part. So client builder is done. The Active Workspace Gateway is done. I'm still going to click on them and just kind of look at them, make sure that the values updated. You can see it picked up on the values I wanted. If I hit the eyeball here and scroll down, you can see that it's picking up on an FSC to use. So right now it's using Bootstrap, but I wanted to use an assigned FSC. I would have to switch it. So there is a benefit to coming in here if you need to override out of the box standards. If I come into the Business Modeler IDE 2 tier, this one will load up. It's 100%, but in the BMIDE 2 tier, I could have it build a mass client deploy that's not specific to a server. So I could take this and deploy it onto a bunch of administrative boxes. And if I do that, then I need to specify the instance name, and it will build that accordingly. What operating system it goes to, and then notice it picked up on the installation path for me. I do need, notice it has auto-selected all of the templates I need for the BMIDE. So the templates you select here should match the ones that you have installed in the system. If you toggle this little toggle at the top, it'll just show you the ones that match you. Those templates are used when you're building a BMIDE template package to deploy new item types to the system. So in the BMIDE, when an administrator creates that package, you need these templates to be able to base your modifications off of what's already installed. So at this point, I'm just going to save the connections. It was already 100%, but I want to update which ones get built. Corporate server and command prediction services are next, but remember I'm making my way from the top down. So command prediction services next. This is a user in the database it's going to create, and this database is basically going to handle the information related to that Active Workspace assistant. So it is going to need information about the database. So I am creating a new command prediction database here. So where is the database host? And this is training 01. That's where my database is. And then database path is just where it wants to create this. In our case, we had created the database in C apps Oracle server and then Aura data. And this is our database. So our database path, if I copy that and put that in, that's where I'm going to get a new file at the end of this that'll represent that database. If I scroll down, it is an Oracle server. Here's my listener port, my SID to connect to, and it needs this information because it's going to need to log in to create these users. There's going to be a user here that manages that database, and then the username is PredictiveDB. I'm going to provide InfoDBA as the password for both of these. Make sure you remember those, and also make sure that those accounts aren't locked as well if you're having issues getting into the server manager. In here, secured communication, if you need TCPS, then you could select that and it will give you the wallet information. Down below that, I have the system user. I provided the credentials during the database install, which was InfoDBA. So I like to save it. Hit the eyeball first though. Notice that nothing shows up or hides. So I'm going to save that, make sure there's no errors. Now, if you have a typo or something and it violates the rules of Deployment Center, it will tell you before it saves it. And now you can see the corporate servers next. I can scroll through and kind of repeat the process. In this case, I'm just providing my login account. This is going to require a session or a service get created called the FSC. So I need to put my domain information, info.dba, in here as the credential. If I just type info.dba as my OS user, info.dba as my password, and hit save component settings, then you're going to see it errors and it shows me that it can't have that. What it's yelling about is I need to add my domain. In my case, I'm just going to say local user, but I'm going to save now and you'll see it will actually update and commit that. So there it goes, and corporate server is 100%. Now I'm going to go back to the corporate server real quick, and I'm just going to check the eyeball. And in here, you'll notice the default volume name is set, where the volume will be created, transient volume directory, which is kind of a scratch pad where things are going to get saved while you're importing, exporting, and doing different things. The encrypted password file location is here. If you build the caches during deployment, it will take a lot longer to build, but your performance after the install is done will be a lot quicker. And then you could override some of the settings. So I'm just going to save this, make sure it's saved, and then I can go down to the database server. Now, through this, as you're walking through, you'll see the other components get closer and closer to being done. And then eventually when you're done, it's a simple matter of just building your scripts, taking them to your deployment location, and deploying them. Database server. So typically a database is not on the server you're deploying to, unless you're doing like a VM. I'm going to go ahead and put my server here, but just pay attention to that. My databases could be deployed on Linux or Windows, so if you're pointing to a database already created, definitely take a look at that. And then you have three options here on this right side. We are not copying an environment using an existing database, which we could. We could have it build a volume, we could have it build or a TC data and create the environment again if we had corrupted our files. We are not creating and populating a database either. This is the one that you would use if you use the general purpose database and not the Teamcenter scripts. This one down here has a note. So for Oracle, this means a table space will be created. For this, the database will be created, but nothing will be Teamcenter specific. Then it will populate it. Now, in our case, we have populate database, create new data directory. And the benefit to this is the additional call here. If you're using create and populate a database, you actually have to be able to point to the database location. So everything that we've taught is kind of geared towards the second option, because if you're installing this and you don't have direct access to see that drive or map it, populate the database allows you to access it and populate it without the need to actually have the path. If I come down, I have a standard database. I have default table spaces. I don't want to modify those. And then I have Oracle or MS SQL. So if you switch to MS SQL, you get your port, username, password, if you want to do it by instance, or what your database name and your collation settings are. It's not really that much different for Oracle. In here, I'm going to put my Oracle database user, which was info.dba. That's who got created with those templates. Okay, and then if I scroll down, my SID is TC, my port is 1521. I could enable secure for the protocol. I do want this additional thing. It says database system user credentials to grant this. This create trigger is required by the indexing system in order to pick up on Delta objects after you do your initial deploy. So in Active Workspace, this means that the search on the initial deployment will update all of the things in the database. But after that, if you make modifications, it won't pick up on those unless you install this. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and provide my passwords. It needs a higher level of permission to do this. It'll grant the permissions and then create the triggers. Save component settings here. You could hit the eyeball for additional settings. For the database server, let me switch back to that page. We'll take a look at the eyeball settings. There are only a couple. It's the character encoding type down at the bottom. All right, making our way down. Dispatcher. So this is that additional component. In our case, it's going to have me build the module, the scheduler, and the dispatcher client. In a distributed environment, the module and scheduler are typically out on a separate set of servers, and the client's running on the core server. We are pretty much only using 4-tier for this, so that means it requires my web server infrastructure, and you can see it's populated everything so far. I do want it to run as a Windows service eventually, so I could just say Windows service instead of a console application. But if you do console applications, then you can kind of start it up and see them interact. So it's up to you on which one you do. In this case, we'll do a Windows service. If I come down to user, I can see that this is the operating system user to create that service. If I do console application, notice that isn't something I have to supply. So I'm going to do Windows service. You can always stop the service and run the console application otherwise. And then I'm going to do my domain infodba, local user, infodba for the password. And then I can see override the service name if I want a different name than Teamcenter Dispatcher in the version. I like it because it has Teamcenter in it. General settings, this is where it's going to get installed. And then this user is responsible for the data, which are called dispatcher request objects, to be created, deleted, updated. So I'm just going to create this with the same password as the username, DC proxy. DC proxy. If I click the eyeball here, notice that it's going to add a bunch, and then I have polling intervals for how often it goes and looks for new requests and overrides. Choose save component settings, and that should update that one as well. Now we're at the dispatcher module. The dispatcher module is the part that actually performs the function of dispatcher, whereas the dispatcher client receives information from the scheduler about the status of the module. The module has all of its settings, but it does need a place where it's going to put the data that it's working on so that the dispatcher client can interact with it too. The key thing about the staging directory is the dispatcher client and the module or server need access to it. So in our case, I'm going to put this at C apps Siemens Teamcenter 2412, and then I'm going to put it in dispatcher server and stage. So that's going to be kind of where I'm going to put my stage directory. And then down below, I'm going to add a translator, which is an individual program or use case for the dispatcher tool. The async service will allow me to duplicate an assembly in the background without locking up my client, generate reports, or other types of tasks that require it to be sent to the background and then you be notified later. Notice there are some for things like NX, email polling, PLM XML creations, and you can take a look at each one of those. There'll be readmes for them and prerequisites in the installation. If I hit the eyeball, I'll get a little bit more. I can see how many tasks it can do, port information, where the logs are going to get created. Notice the logs are getting created in this dispatcher folder, so the dispatcher root directory. I want this to be dispatcher server under 2412, like the stage. So I'm going to delete this and say dispatcher server. And then you can see that now this will match where the stage gets created. And then if I come down, I'm going to update the log. So this one didn't update all the fields accordingly, but it's easy to put this in. Now the downfall, if it's different, you'll have two different directories. If I come down in here, it'll show the supported list, async service, and then I could override my settings. I'm going to save component settings. Now it skipped scheduler. If I go to scheduler, it's 100% now, and you can see everything's almost done here. So if I go to scheduler, it's 100%, and I just see a couple of things. It's going to be a Windows service is what I want, so I want to make sure I pick that and provide my credentials. InfoDBA, this is the operating system. If I want to override the service name, I could hit the eyeball to give myself a little bit more options, but I kind of like everything. I'm not installing the admin client at the moment, and I'm not installing the documentation, but you could. In here, I've got everything I need. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. All right. So now I just want to double check the module has the Windows Service option as well. It does not, so I don't remember doing that for that. So I'm going to go ahead and add that for the dispatcher module and save that. So now I've got all three of them starting up as a Windows service, and I can move down to the FMS system. The FMS system is basically the core system for moving files around. So your FSC, the thing that is right here that we're selecting, is going to be the home base of that system, and it's going to act as a volume server. So in here, we've got where the FSC files are going to get installed. This will be a service, and it is a service that needs to be running for pretty much all tasks, including deployments. So if I come in here and do my installation, you can see it's master is true at the bottom, and that just means that the instructions for the entirety of the FMS system are going to come from this file. Hit the eyeball button, and now you can scroll down and you can see assign to file store groups. You have the options to specify where your caches are going to get created and what size they are. Definitely take a look at some information on tuning your FMS. And then you can see that this is the master, and what if you had a cloud volume that you needed to connect to, you could connect to. I'm going to hit Save Component Settings, and that should finish up pretty much all of my FSC except for my keys. The FSC keys, this is my key store for the FMS system, which basically provides access to the file requests through my system. I'm going to generate new keys. You could use asymmetric, get a little bit more secure with it down below. I'm going to click the eyeball task and notice there's nothing else to scroll to. At bare minimum, this is what you need. Saving the component settings, now we can move off to Indexer. Notice we only have a few left here. Indexer, Indexing Engine, which are responsible for the global search tool in Active Workspace. We have our licensing server information that we need to provide. This is the one component that is not on our box. And then we have a little bit about the hosting apparatus for Active Workspace, which is microservices, and a couple of other things. So in here, Indexer is the search tool. The Indexer is the utility that runs the processes that updates the Solar server, which is a database. The indexing engine is that database that gets populated by those tools. So in here, the indexer, if I scroll down, is going to get installed in my TC root. It could be installed in its own folder. I'm installing the triggers for indexing, which is why I provided that system account earlier. I have 3 max connections. You can tune the indexer to use more TC server processes if needed, but it is 4-tier. The working directory, and I do want it as a service. So you can see the name of the service is good. It starts with Teamcenter for me. I want it to auto start the service or not. In a fresh install, nothing has been indexed. So starting the service, just picking up on changes, isn't going to do much. So I don't like to start the service by default here or the suggestion builder service. I like to go in, configure my index, and then start them. These are going to be credentials for the operating system because of those services. And then in here, if I scroll down, do I want the indexer administrative user info to also be indexed? I could in here, so we can select that. And then we can provide our credentials. So do we want this to administer to user info? I'm not going to do that in this case, but we may do an ad hoc video on how to. Check the eyeball and scroll down, and you can see overriding credentials that may have been inherited from other features you can do here. This is pretty important because it propagates credentials down, you may have the opportunity or need to update it. Save the component settings, and we'll go to the indexing engine if it requires it. So the indexing engine is a Solr database. It's Apache, deployed by Siemens. You can see the installation directory, and basically it just needs a login for Solr. And this will be set at the corporate server level, the Solr level, and the indexer level. So I'm just going to provide infodba as the password. Scroll down, and you can see this is going to be a service that's running. So I'm going to provide the credentials to run it as a service. Hit the eyeball and come down, and you can see you can set it up to do SSL with HTTPS if you need. Just make sure those certs are applied. Hit Save Component Settings, and then it'll ask me about my license server. If you get any errors with Automatic or any errors related to license server, it'll usually tell you in the logs for the deployer. In here, my license server is on license 01, and it is a Windows-based license server on port 28,000. I do know that the new license server is 29,000. We have just kept it standard to 28. If you hit the eyeball, nothing pops up, and I can hit Save Component Settings. All right, so microservice node. This is the key infrastructure that hosts your active workspace client file and provides a gateway into that client component. So in here, if I scroll down, it's going to be the Teamcenter Process Manager is the name. It is a master node. You can split these up and have secondary nodes that help with failover or redundancy. And then you just need to tell them about each other. If you want HTTPS, you can specify HTTPS. You just need the certificates set. And then in here, the default for the system will be 9090 and 8787 for the ports. Eureka is the name of the service registry, and the service dispatcher is another primary component of that microservices install. This microservices install requires its own set of its own key store, which basically locks down communication for this component, and that key store gets built into your WAR files or your zip file during generation. So in here, if I provide my password, which in my case is infodba, then I can come down and my file repository, which is where it will deploy my Active Workspace client file to. This is basically where my Active Workspace interface is hosted from. This is defined here. So if you want that defined elsewhere, you can put it there. There is no need to no longer to create the folder or anything like that. It does a pretty good job of it. The components it's installing are the command prediction service, which is required for that assistant tool, the GraphQL service for development, the declarative artifact service, which is Darcy, and this is for development through the command builder and panel builder. We have the Microsoft parameter store, and that just kind of comes in with it. And then we have the file repository service. All of these are microservices that are going to be deployed. If I hit the eyeball and scroll down, then we have all of these, and I can hit Save Component Settings, and we have populated those settings. All right, finally, if you look, I only have two pieces left. I have my web tier for my WAR files and my Server Manager cluster configuration file. Server Manager cluster configuration, this is basically where is my database. So in here, my database is installed on Training 01, and it's going to create a user. In older versions of Teamcenter, we used to have a different form of accessing our TC server processes while they were running. And recently, in the Teamcenter 12 3-ish version, they changed it. Siemens changed it to be a user in the database with its own database, and all the information is in there. And that is what this cluster ID is for. That is why we have to give it the database path. Here is we have to point it to where it's going to build this so it can store that information, and this is detrimental. If it gets locked, your server manager will crash. So in here, I've got my database path. I don't have one already, or I could have connected to it. If your DBA's created it for you, that's great. Use an existing database and then access that. Database server, port, SID, and then the user of this database. And then I'm going to provide the password. I recommend keeping the users very close to what they are out of the box. Passwords obviously change, but the user, somebody else could come in and reference it and then be what they'd be looking for. Then, because you're creating a new database and user, you need the credentials for the system account. Make sure you type them in okay. And then I'm going to click the eyeball just to be sure there's nothing else, and click Save Component Settings to lock that in. At this point, if I come down, the final piece of this puzzle is the Teamcenter Web Tier Java EE configuration. If I look at this, I am deploying these WAR files out onto this server on Wildfly. It could be Tomcat, could be JBoss. Wildfly's mine. Training 01 is where it's deployed. It is on an OS operating system. The general settings for Teamcenter installation, which are required for it to run, are here. The port I'm running it on is 8080. That's my default port for Wildfly. And then that will update my 4-tier URL, which I can use in other installations. Then I can see my Teamcenter application name. This will be the name of the WAR file deployed. And then the web application server name is training 01, which is this server, but this is where Wildfly is installed. The JMX RMI port is 8089. So just note, 8089, if you don't change this, will collide with several other components in your build. 8089 will be your viz assigner port for visualization in the system. So 8089 may collide with other things. I want 8087, but 8087 may already be used as well. Just pay attention to what you may want to stop or start or whatnot. In this case, I know 8089 cannot be used. So 8087 is what I'm going to use in replace of it. Teamcenter connection name. This is going to be when you log in, what the connection name is. I'm going to say Teamcenter Training. And then you could add a tag for your FMS system. Training. Okay. So hit the eyeball to give yourself a little bit more room to work. And then you have your overrides, log volume name. But in general, click Save Component Settings. All right, so at this point, while it builds those up, we now have a 100% across the board and a full install of Teamcenter. And this is saved. So as long as you're building this on an instance that may not be where you're deploying, you could always roll back and regenerate the deploy scripts and build more iterations of what you want to deploy to. So now what we're going to do is we're going to kick off the generation of that deployment. In this case, we're going to say go to deploy. It will go to that deployment location. And then all we need to do is say generate install scripts. When it does this, it will actually output a list of instructions where everything is. And it's going to, by default, since I didn't add an additional deploy location, it is going to, by default, add this deployment to my location in here. So Siemens, Deployment Center, Repository, Deploy Scripts, And there's my Teamcenter training environment, my install, and it would give you an upgrade or a different folder if you had a different use case, the time date stamp UTC, and my deployment instructions. Those are what you see on the screen. So all I need to do is take this. If I open up the instructions, these are great. They're going to say what's needed, what you need to do, what's all going to get installed, and the deployment instructions. So definitely take a look at these. But if I come down in here, I just need to take this to deploy it, right-click it, and choose Extract All. So I'm going to extract those to this location real quick. Doesn't take very long. And then in that, it'll have a deploy file, or SH for Linux. And then everything else is going to be taken into account. You have a set Java home in here, but this is basically a standalone little deployer. I'm going to go back up here, copy this whole folder. I'm actually going to cut it. So now I have no redundant zips or anything, and I'm going to throw it in C temp. So I'm just going to put it in here. That's where I want it to be deployed from. Gives me a standard directory to CD to. And then I'm going to go to that folder and open it up in my command prompt, CD to it, or my Visual Studio install. In my case, I like the Visual Studio install, so I'm going to say run as admin. I'm going to open that directory. Open folder, paste it, and go. So now I'm there, and I should be able to run a good terminal here. So I'll come up and generate my terminal window. Pull this up. Now, I do like to grab my terminal and move it in the system or rearrange the layout a little bit. So feel free to do that if you want. You can use this to kind of split the window or rearrange it. In my terminal, remember when it opens up, it's PowerShell. So I'm going to select my command prompt, close my PowerShell window. And then in here, I'm already in that directory. So I'm going to say deploy.bat dc username equals dc admin dc password equals dc admin, and then software location equals c apps media software Siemens software. And that's where my media is. So that's where that 2412 package is. This brings up a good point. When you're doing this, you need to have a local version of the software, whether it's a map drive or whatever. You need to be able to access the software. At this point, you hit enter and the installation will begin. So this will go through and actually do the install. It does take a little bit in my experience on this machine to actually do it, but what it's going to preemptively do is check all your prereqs. There is an ignore diagnostics command you could use. Definitely run the -H on that command, but this should go through and deploy everything pretty much in your system, and then once it's completed, we'll be able to go through and we'll be testing and validating the install. So we hope you had a good time learning how to utilize Deployment Center to build a Teamcenter environment. Again, really quick and dirty, top level, everything you need, just kind of foundational components. Installing on one box, but take it or leave it. And we'll come back once this installation is complete to give you more information on this 2412 software.